Washington are massive underdogs at Oregon.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports is Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to talk about who's impressed us the most in 2024. We got a couple of caveats. We're going to get to that. So make sure you stick around for that. We're going to talk about what we want to see out of this game where Washington is Oregon is favored by 18.5 points. Feels weird to say that. Don't like saying that, but that's where we are because Washington, they are massive underdogs going into this game against top-ranked Oregon. Just a reminder to all the everydayers out there, make sure to like this video, comment down below if you got any questions, comments, concerns, and make sure you hit that subscribe button as it does help us out a lot. But Lars, when we look at this game, what's just the big thing outside of the obvious?
Well, I mean, the obvious is honestly just make it feel like it matters because we thought the Penn State whiteout game mattered. We thought some of these other games mattered, and they really, I mean, not that they didn't. Let's be clear. I'm not saying the players, quit or anything like that, but it just, honestly, maybe from the coaching staff, prove that, hey, look, use what you did with this week off advantage to your bonus. You have an entire 2 weeks to plan for the number one team in the country, so you can't say, oh, hey, we're getting some guys back off injury. We don't know who we're going to have, yada, yada, yada. It's no, everything what's happening going into this game. The only one you don't really know publicly is quarterback, and I guarantee you Jedd already knows who his quarterback is. Whether he says it or not is a completely different discussion.
So let's talk about that because that's something where, I'm sure we're going to bring the conversation back to that a little bit later on. But I think that's the biggest thing where, in our comments all week, shout out to all the everydayers out there. You guys rock. But there's been a lot of arguments for both. And I think that there's a fair case to be made for either guy, whether it be the experience of Will and not wanting to throw DeMond out there in his first start at number one Oregon, where they've got a really good defensive line. And they're, like you said, 18.5 point favorites. It's massive. So there's that aspect of it. But then on the other side with Will, it's okay, got 2 games left for him in his college career. Can you find a way to just get him productive on the road, whatever that game plan might be with the week off? That's something that I think is going to be really important in this game. Because one thing that I really have a lot of faith in is if Steve Belichick can find a way to stop the run in this game, that I don't want to say Washington has an advantage defensively, but the more I think about it, the more I say, hey, I like what the Huskies have here.
I agree, and that's why I kind of mentioned the Penn State whiteout, that wasn't necessarily all on Steve, but it was Penn State drive after drive, the first 4 or 5 drives getting touchdowns. We hadn't seen that this season. Now, did the offense help a ton? No, but I think that's kind of that's been the hallmark of Steve's defense. The hallmark of Steve and Jedd's relationship is, hey, you know what? And we'll get a stop, and then we'll give you the ball, even if it's at the 2-yard line. You might have to drive 98 yards, but we'll at least make that stop for you. And they couldn't do it for a multitude of reasons. I mean, we're talking about 3 direct snap touchdowns to a non-running back, a backup quarterback, and 2 tight ends, the same tight end. Now, granted, Tyler Owens, all-world tight end. The backup quarterback is what it is, kind of like a DeMond thing. A little bit worse, a little bit different, but just think of it in a similar vein. Those plays hadn't happened before. So now that and the road issue also is not really a huge thing because you're going from Seattle to Eugene. You're not going Seattle to Austin, Texas, or Seattle, right. Or State College, right? or Rutgers, and it's right. It's one of those where it's look, you got all those trips out of the way. This is kind of that one game where it's all right, you're going just down the coast. You can't tell me travel is going to be the reason this defense doesn't travel this time around.
No, I'm 100% with you there. Where I think that's something that I'm going to be looking at. But when I look at it, I just say, I want to find a way to stop Jordan James if I'm Steve Belichick in this game, because that's been the biggest killer all year long. And that's a guy who I've been really impressed with. He's done a really good job breaking tackles. Just every time you watch him, it's, oh man, that guy. I think about Bucky Irving last year when I think about Oregon, just how slippery he was in that first game. And that's what I've seen from Jordan James. It's a very different, style of running, but it's equally effective. And when I think about what this Husky defense hasn't been able to show all year, it's stopping the run. And I think that one thing that I do like about the run defense, though, are these linebackers. And I think that it's something, if they come to play, if they find a way to have a big day and, Khmori House can get penetration, or Alfonso Tupatala or Carson Bruner, or however you want to find a way to scheme that up if you're Steve Belichick, that it's not necessarily, again, going to be a large advantage Washington, where we've seen what Oregon has done this season. But at the same point, it's something where if you can find a way to rely on your guys and force Dillon Gabriel to, make throws on 3rd and long. Yeah, he's done that this season, but I like what the secondary can do at the same point against some of these Oregon receivers.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, like it or not, like this game has come down to 2 possessions in the last 4 meetings. I'm throwing the 21 meeting in there as well. 26-16. It's a 10-point game, albeit, Jimmy Lake and all that sort of in the rain and all that, and you call it what it will. But this has always been a close game. So that's why you look at the spread and it's like 18.5, 20.5. Like, you got that blowout out of your way against Penn State. We thought you'd be a little more respectful there and make it, 35-20 or 35-14 at the very least. And you didn't even show up. Save all the points that you didn't score against Penn State for this game. And that's obviously not how football works, right. But it's what we're talking about, where, show that it matters. Show that and it's not that the coaches don't care. But you have all the pieces here. You have a great defensive coordinator to put the thing together. Can Jedd put it together on offense? I think so.
So I like your thought process here, but I think that you're missing one key element, and it's the most important one, where you talk about, hey, it's like saving certain things. Maybe it's a rivalry game. Like that's what matters in all of this. Where you talk about, that 21 team was terrible. We know how that turned out, but it was still a rivalry game, and you can say the same about this one, where the matchups are very different. Than you want to talk 21, or even if you want to talk the last couple of seasons, they're very, very different. But I look at it and I just say, I'm not going to necessarily try to say I'm talking myself into believing in this Washington team, where I wrote about it over on Huskies Wire. There are a lot of things to like about this team, whether it be short or long term. That's something we spent the entire bye week discussing. The problem is that they haven't put it together over a full 60 minutes all season long, really. I feel like the closest we've seen to that outside of some of these non-conference games was against UCLA in their last game, where that was the closest we've seen, and it still took DeMond coming in and just kind of reviving the offense at the end of the 3rd quarter. So there's still things where you say it's not completely there yet, and this is the worst possible scenario for all of those things to come to a head in the season finale. Obviously, Oregon's looking to go to be 12-0. Like, there are a lot of things against Washington this game, but at the same point, you might think that Jedd Fisch can find a way to use some of those and just turn them into fuel at the very least.
Right. Well, I mean, it's everything that this team, I don't think anybody even on the team thought they were going to be, 10-2, 9-3. I mean, as much as I love Jonah, and ironically, I remember when he mentioned at Big Ten Media Day back in July, I was like, no, I'll be back here. And I'm like, 2 years from now, sure, I'll give you that. 18 months from now, sure, I'll give you that. This year, I don't know about that, son. I truly don't know about that. If you want to, this is where that path starts next year for DeMond, sure. for Jonah, for all those guys that are going to be coming back. This is your bowl game.
Right.
This is your bowl game. And Will, whatever. I think Will's in a different spot now where it's like, look, he's going to be – his stock is not pro or minus whatever happens in the next 2 games. Like, it might be better, in terms of like, hey, we'll end up letting this guy go and doing whatever. And NFL teams would say, hey, you know what? He can help our quarterback develop and he can help our guy do this and that. I don't think you're not at that 6-win, 7-win or 6-game, 7-game mark where it's like, hey, let's not turn it over to DeMond just yet. Like, look, Will's done his service, okay? If he ends up playing, so be it. But I think at this point, Jedd and Will are both looking at this saying, you know what? How can I help leave a legacy? And I think the best legacy is help DeMond as much as possible to beat Oregon. And I think Will is probably the perfect guy to do that. Who better than as a quarterback coach than coach his son, SEC record holder, along with Jedd and Jimmy Doherty? Like, that to me, that's what I think what's actually going to help this game the most.
Lars, with that being said, let's get into some of the things we really want to see on Saturday. Right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel, you can get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And, Monday Night Football coming up, Chargers-Ravens, going to be a really interesting game. One guy I really like in this game is Ladd McConkey. I kind of like all his overs, catches, yards, maybe an anytime touchdown in there. This Ravens defense has been solid against the run, not so much against the pass. I'd go check out those odds and so many more over on FanDuel. So, Lars, what's the number one thing you want to see from this game? I feel like we got to start with quarterback, where you did a really great job describing some of that over the break, or right before the break, but there's a lot more to that.
Right. Well, I think it's a matter of how. Let's kind of roll with the theory that Damon Williams is your starting quarterback. That's probably that's
Sure.
The one thing I think we both want to see, I think, at this point. So we probably should just kind of both cover that in the first segment and build off or second part of the second segment here and kind of just build off of it, because I don't think there's a reason at this point, and this isn't being sourced. I'm not looking down at my phone to make sure I'm being clear to say this, but I don't think there's a way Damon doesn't start at this point. There's no reason for Damon Williams not to start at this point. You look at it, you get 2 weeks with the playbook, 80, because when I asked Jedd, I think in week 3 or 4 or 5, somewhere around in late September, let's say, what's the playbook? 80-20 ratio for Damon and for Will and Damon. I think now that it's flipped, that's why you give Damon 2 weeks. Give Damon the first week, see how do you handle the playbook. I think we both know that Damon is fine in terms of processing and handling the playbook. His decision-making got better against UCLA. And again, it's UCLA. It's not Penn State, but I think that Penn State game and experience did help him, didn't throw any turnovers or anything like that. So hasn't thrown the pick this season. Let's keep that in mind. So I think he understands how to grasp the playbook, and now it's a matter of, okay, now let's install the game plan. And I think that, to me, is why, again, you look at it, there's no reason why Damon can't start. And the only reason why I say that is because there's nothing to lose in this game. If UW loses this game and Damon, is 5 of 25 for 150 yards and 2 picks, so be it. But I don't think that's going to ever happen. I don't think that seems real. Like, just saying that, I'm kind of reaching and trying to pick out what stats would work in that scenario. I just don't see it. When we've seen Jonah come in for that zone read, or Adam Muhammad, all those reps are already there. He doesn't have to worry about the exchange, the operation, which is what sometimes we talk about and what had struggled early on in the season with TT Lee. Like, are you going to snap the ball high to Damon? It's like, I think Damon is just a better, safer option in that, given that, we're now talking about week 13. We're not talking about week 3.
So I like where you're going with that. Let's talk about the running game, because I think that's the number one thing where he where he provides the most edge, and it's the read option. It's where, you talk about wanting him to start, and let's stay under that assumption that he does, where finding a way to negate Oregon's defensive line as much as possible is the number one thing I want to see in this game, because they've done a really good job of disrupting, and especially with Washington's offensive line. We know what it is. We know what it's been all season long. You look at this game and you can say, all right, if you can find a way to negate that, you can just stay ahead of the chains. That's going to be the most important thing, to make sure you're able to do that. And having Damon and having that extra option where he can pull it and run at any given time, and maybe you try to get an extra linebacker creeping up towards the line of scrimmage. You can find other ways to make sure, we see Bryce Bedecker, whoever it might be, creeping up. I'm going to throw the quick slant to Denzel Boston. There's more room for RPOs. There's more room for all these different things with Damon Williams in there. And I think about Jonah Coleman, and I think about, this is the kind of guy who can find a way to establish his will against this Oregon defense, which has been really solid. It has all season long. I hate admitting these things, but this is where we are. We'll talk to our good buddy Spencer McLaughlin about all that later this week. But the more I look at it, the more I say finding ways to just keep them off balance as much as possible is something that Damon does very, very well. And I look at it, whether it be Jonah, Cam Davis, Adam Muhammad, whoever it might be in that scenario, you just gotta find ways to stay ahead of the chains, because that's the biggest problem. That has been the biggest problem all season, is getting behind the chains.
Absolutely. Well, and I think in a similar it's also because you literally said it verbatim. It's get Dillon Gabriel off FC too. Because you look at if this is going to be a quarterback battle, this is also going to require your defense to, make some plays, which didn't happen against Penn State. You look at, because I was looking at the sacks allowed. Oregon's only allowed 12 sacks this season, which is relatively high, actually, for them in terms of considering.
A lot of those came earlier in the year, too.
Exactly. And so, but I'm glad you mentioned that, because now it's like same thing with Washington. It's like, hey, look, there's two different kind of versions of this team. Is there the first half, and then there's the second half. You mentioned UCLA where DeMond got better and things like that. These are all trending in the right direction. So you have to find a way. And this is, I think, what Steve Belichick is good at. What worked for other teams in those first 3 or 4 games? Now, or was it Oregon personnel? Was it a mixture of both? And I'm sure Steve will both. Right. And I'm sure Steve will find a way to rationalize. He will never say this, but like, look, these teams are making Oregon struggle because of X, Y, and Z. Now I'm going to do that with, by the way, Russell Davis, a potential Zach Durkee, a potential other guy coming back, where you look at it, hey, Washington's got just as many horses to make that happen.
So I agree, and I'm glad you brought that point up, because that was the biggest thing that I remember. I sat down to watch the Boise game that they played, where Dillon Gabriel just looked like he didn't know what he was doing, and that's something that has gotten better over the course of the season. But the biggest problem that I saw from that team was every time that he got blitzed and somebody did get through, he didn't know what to do with the ball. There were times where he would just kind of cradle up. There were times where he'd try to escape and just didn't do it effectively, or he'd walk into pressure. They'd do different things like that. And it looked like they had problems along the offensive line, which they seem to have somewhat sorted out. But the more I look at it, the more I say, if you can find ways to do that with Alfonso Tuputala, with Russell Davis, Isaiah Ward, Lance Holtzclaw, insert X player here for somebody who can try to get pressure. If you can find a way to do that, maybe you can force a bad throw. And like, it's silly to have to talk about it this way, but this is just the way that this team has been this season, especially on the road. But you just need to find a way to stay in the game, whatever that might be. If it's forcing a turnover, if it's just getting a sack in whatever possible way, that's what this team needs to do. It's find ways to do that, and it's by getting pressure, which, Lars, as you said, Steve Belichick is really, really good at doing.
Right. I mean, throw Jane Wayne in there. I mean, just imagine Jane. Think about, because this is there's 2 parts here, where Jedd said last Monday, this is a 1-game season. Straight up 1-game season, which basically that's why I keep saying it's a bowl game. But at the same point, for all these guys coming back, this is also a way to say, hey, you know what? You want to get talked about next season? You want this team to matter next season? Show it against Oregon. Show it against the number 1 team in the country who hasn't lost yet. There used to be that stigma against number 1 teams earlier in the season, where it's like, hey, anybody who gets the number 1 spot can hold on to it. Kalen, shout out.
Sure.
But, it's one of those, not just Kalen, not just Alabama, but, Georgia, all those teams that ended up having 1 loss or multiple losses at the end of the season. Oregon, with a loss, does not lose the Big Ten championship game. They got, almost probably, I think, helps them, where they're like, hey, you know what? So be it. Like, we're still in the Big Ten championship game. But it's also, it's for Washington. It's all for Washington. It's all there for Washington to say, you know what? This is why Washington matters. This is why. And to your point, whether you win or lose, keep it close. If Oregon has to win on a last, drive touchdown or a late field goal, I know it's not a win, but that's a win. Like it's not the same, but you know what I'm saying. Like at least be in that position. So we're talking about it after the game, saying, hey, you know what? They had this. There's just a play here, a play there. Next year, Jedd will be able to fix that. And that's what we've basically been saying most of the season.
So I see where you're going with that. I'm personally not in the business of moral victories, but I think it's a really good point that you bring up there, because if you, or this is the thing, in every single, or not every single, but since the Rutgers game, every single road game has been somewhat non-competitive, and that's the frustrating thing. And I think that that's the number 1 thing that you look at, and you just try to say, hey, whatever it is, to find a way to get the guys up for the game. Try to find a way to say, hey, we want to knock off our arch rival, win our 4th in a row against this team. Find a way to maybe knock them out of the number 1 spot. Maybe Ohio State overtakes them if they beat Michigan. Whatever it might be. Yeah. But all those different things, you can look at them and just say, it all comes down to this. And when I say, to bring it back just to the name of the segment, which is what do you want to see from this game? It's that. It's finding a way to just have Jedd be a big game coach, where that's what this is. This is a big game where it doesn't, you throw the records out the window when Washington and Oregon meet every time. Doesn't matter, because that's what it is. That's what it is between those 2 teams. And just the more I look at it, the more I say you have an opportunity to, just because I'm going to bring it back to just not only the theme of last week, but the theme of Jedd Fisch. The theme of Jedd Fisch is building. and finding ways to continue to move forward and build this team for the Big Ten, for the CFP, whatever it might be, all of the goals that he has stressed endlessly, you can show a step in the right direction to say, all right, like, yeah, there's a bowl game, you win the bowl game, awesome. But whatever it might be, Lars, let's take your route of finding a way to force them to win on a last-second field goal. Whatever it is. Just, hey, look at all this positive momentum we carried into the offseason, where we're able to push them to the edge. Maybe find a way to win that game. Again, whatever it is, those are all positive building blocks, which is everything Jedd wants to not only take onto the recruiting trail, but something that you want to just make sure you carry into the 2025 season, where, as we've said, the schedule looks a lot better, where you're not playing 3 teams in the top 10 on the road. All of a sudden, it looks a lot different. But Lars, let's flip the script here a little bit, and let's look back on what the season has been and talk about some guys that have impressed us the most. Right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time, because Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets, which is great news for anybody in the Seattle area who might go on to check out Husky basketball, the Seahawks, who had a nice win over the Cardinals on Sunday, maybe the Kraken. There's so many great deals you can find over on Game Time, because with Game Time Picks, curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. With their all-in pricing, you can toggle this feature to show the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. And with their seat views, you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So, Lars, we want to have a little bit of fun with this segment, where there are a lot of times where you can just say, oh, X player, Y player, right? Adam Muhammad, Damon Williams, Denzel Boston, all incredibly impressive. But we're going to expand the criteria a little bit. Anybody involved with the Washington program, who has impressed you the most this season?
You know, that's a good question. Like, we're talking personnel,
anybody,
department, anybody,
on-field,
right?
off-field, anybody, yeah.
You know what? I'm going to take one from you. I'm going to take your boy. I'm going to take Steve Belichick, because the reason we're going to start here, because we got a whole segment of guys to go through. The reason why I say that is that hire was only going one of two ways: really good or incredibly bad, and there was no in between. And if anything, maybe it's been a little more in between in terms of some results on the field. But Steve really seems to have committed himself, where he, again, does not have a Twitter account. We expected that. Not surprised there. He's got Robert Bala. He's got Robert Bala for that. I'm just gonna tell you that right now. He's got Robert Bala for that. So my thing is, that was kind of the whole sticking point in the words. Like, look, I love the sell. I love the Belichick name, but it can't be a nepotism hire. And we knew it wasn't gonna be a nepotism hire. But I just want to say, like, the one thing that has impressed me is truly seeing how Steve has developed freshmen, guys that the former coach could not give 2 cents about. So the fact that we're talking about an NFL coach with no college experience recently, and Rutgers does not count, coming back, and all those sort of things, all the way out in Seattle. Now, again, is he going to stay here 3, 4, 5 years? Probably not. No. But for what that is and what he did this year, I think the growth that these guys had, both on the field and in recruiting, was what he's bringing in. I mean, we're talking Washington Lobby having a conversation with Steve Belichick in July at the Luau, saying, just because here's the thing. Washington never saw a practice, because I asked him this, and I was like, hey, do you ever see Ball at practice? Like, that dude you cannot miss him in practice. And he's like, no, you know what? I didn't. But Steve told me, watch what we do with our linebackers this season. Just wait. And look what happens. 3 different linebackers, 3 killing it.
So one guy I had written down that I really want to make sure I mentioned is Khmori House, where I feel like even more so than some of the guys on offense, where, like, you talk about the true freshmen, Damon, Decker DeGraff, Adam Muhammad, whoever it might be, where Khmori has obviously gotten the most time out of all of those guys. And it was something where I remember you and I were watching him in the spring, and we were really impressed. We thought, oh, this guy's a lot of fun to watch, but how much is he going to play this year? Because he looks really light. And he did a great job putting on weight. And a great job finding a way to force himself into the rotation. Where I remember sitting at Lumen Field with you during the Apple Cup, and we're like, wait, that's Khmori out there getting a start. And it was awesome because we saw what he did. We're like, okay, we came away pretty impressed. And the more we've seen him this season, the better he's gotten. And I think about, Steve in 2025. I think about this whole defense, what it's going to look like next season, where the biggest concern that you and I had were, hey, what is this linebacker room going to look like without Carson, without Alfonso Tupatala, without Drew Fowler, without, at the time we thought Brian Parham was going to be, somebody who's in the rotation at the very least. But we thought, what's that going to look like? Is it just going to be, oh yeah, all of a sudden we're going to trot like Devin Bryant and Hayden Moore and maybe Khmori's going to be in the rotation? No, this is Khmori's room now. And he's just gotten better and better every single week.
Oh, he really has. And the thing is, it's not just for Khmori, because then recruits are now seeing that and saying, hey, ZRS, I want, by the way, hilarious to imagine if he committed to Florida State. Like, just hilarious prank if he did that. So again, it's a matter of Washington came in with nothing to sell except the university and the dudes themselves, right? Jedd saying, hey, look at what I can do. And, everybody else basically, following Jedd's footsteps. And I think they really laid the foundation, no pun intended here, because I know it's Jedd's favorite buzzword and buzz saying and all that. But they really, this entire staff, and so my next kind of segue off of that would be Steve and then Jedd. It's not theoretically what we said, where it's 8-4, maybe 9-4 with a bowl win. Actually, 8-5 with a bowl win is just as good. Like, I think to me,
Sure.
And I know it's a stretch, and I know it, it takes a win against Oregon to get there, but you're still in play, and regardless, let's say you lose to Oregon, you can still win the bowl game and finish with an above 500 record. So I think all things considered, when you take a step back, isn't you and I about like 8-4, they should beat this team, they should beat that team. By the way, they should beat Rutgers, they should beat Wazoo. They could have played better against Iowa. Maybe you don't win that Iowa game, but you play better. Too. Indiana, but then you also beat a top 10 Michigan team who we thought wouldn't happen. So all things being considered, you take a step back from the 35,000 foot view that I love looking through. This is a successful first season for Jedd Fisch. Like it or not. Now, again, is it what it should have been? No. Is it what it could have been? No. But given what it is and what he started with at Arizona, this is a much improved Jedd Fisch. And I can't wait to see how he builds it into 25. I almost kind of wish this offseason Jedd becomes a true Northwestern man, really leans into that Fisch thing. Because, man, if he's an outdoorsman, which I know he's probably not. I'm not saying he's like anti-outdoorsman, but you know exactly what I mean when I say this.
I do.
If he's got the beard. If he leaned into being a rugged outdoorsman, oh my God, I feel like he could just plant his flag and do what Kalen never did.
So I like where you're going with that. I also want to talk about somebody off the field. I want to talk about Tyler Owens, where one thing that, we've seen it with a whole bunch of different guys is, and for anybody out there, Washington strength coach, this strength and conditioning staff, or Ron McKeefery, obviously Kalen's strength coach, friend of the show, we thought that was going to be a huge loss, and it still was. Ron did a really great job with this program, but Tyler Owens has been a fantastic person to fill his shoes, where he's come in and done a really good job building up whoever you want to say. Or Russell Davis is probably one of the top examples. I think about other guys in the edge room, whether it be Jaden Wayne, Lance Holtzclaw, or those were guys who have these big projectable bodies that you really like, but they weren't there yet in terms of the weight that they needed to get by in the Big Ten. And we've seen all of those guys get bigger, faster, stronger over the course of the season. And one guy that Jedd has talked about endlessly in terms of that just mindset is Demond, where he said Demond needs to gain 10, 12 pounds of muscle this offseason. And you look at how a lot of the guys in this room have, not just in this room, in this program, have grown throughout the course of the season. You think about what another offseason like that is going to look like. I think about some of these guys who you and I really like that might still be in that lighter frame, but Apaki Finau, who's gained a lot of weight that we've seen over the course of the year. I think about some guys at defensive tackle, maybe like an Omar Khan, what that could look like if Armand Parker can get right and get healthy, if you can find a way to make sure that guy's an impact player next season. You look all over the field, Khmori House being another one. But you see guys that have grown and gained strength and where we talk about the building blocks, we talk about everything that can be going forward. You say, all right, there's a strength and conditioning program here that will help those guys and get them there, and you can show those results right away.
Yeah, well, it's what needed to happen because, especially because you mentioned McKeefery, it's like, don't waste the good progress that was made there, because before it brought on McKeefery, it was Josh Rosen UCLA levels. It was bad. It was, and I say Josh Rosen UCLA in terms of that atmosphere, that all that came with it. Just could not DGAF. It's one of those sort of things. And so when you look at it, And it's everything Jedd sells, where I'm glad you mentioned Tyler Owens, because Cadillac Mitchell, same thing, where he brings another guy from Arizona, several guys from Arizona, and they invested in those facilities. I know Cadillac had tweeted out a bunch of kind of short videos working out with guys inside on turf and things like that. And it's like, those are the small, detailed investments to where it's like, hey, if I'm an offensive lineman, I ain't going to work out in the stadium at, January 30th on a Tuesday afternoon. I don't even know what the 30th is, but just work with me here. Like mid-January or mid-February, working out in the cold and snow. It's like, no. You can get that rep in on turf. Just do it inside right here in the weight room. And those are the small little details that I think will allow this team to kind of make a jump. And you might think, really, like those are things like, what are you saying?
Yes.
If you're just working out and lifting weight, that's one thing. You could go to the Dempsey, sure. But I think even the Dempsey, whether it's being used for X, Y, and Z or whatever, it's about giving football what football needs. Give the cash cow what it needs.
And so that's a good thing. Or I feel like we should end with this, where it comes to, you talk about it being a successful season for Jedd Fisch. Some of those little things, some of those upgrades that he's made where, you look at him at first and you're like, oh, why is he emphasizing this so heavily? Where I feel like I've seen that, whether it be on Twitter or wherever else, it's why is, he talking so much about money and why does he ask for this and this and that? Because those are the things that are important, where whenever he talks about these little things, he says, hey, Texas is doing this, Michigan's doing that, Georgia's doing this. That's what it takes to stay ahead. And I feel like that's something where, I think back over my life growing up watching this team, and I'm sure you could say the same thing, where this isn't the way that we've heard coaches talk, where I think back to Steve Sarkisian. There's no way he was talking about these sort of things. Chris Peterson, as much as we love the guy, these were not his biggest focuses. We're not even going to get into the whole Jimmy Lake thing. And Kalen was Kalen. We know what that was like. So I think about what Jedd wants and think about his vision to move the program forward. And I say, that's a really impressive thing. That's a really great thing that I think about. And I say, yeah, if you want to make sure that Washington, which is something you and I truly believe, that Washington can be a true destination, be a top 10 to 15 program every single season, it's those little things that really, really matter. And it's about everybody finding a way to get behind it. And Jedd is doing a really, really good job with that. You just have to see it through. And you have to make sure that those investments continue to be made every single year. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all every day for tuning in. Thank you so much for making Locked On Huskies your first listen today. Now for your second listen, check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Our guy Craig Sheeman puts the Big Ten first when everyone else overlooks it. You can find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever else you listen to your podcast. And please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so you never miss when we post new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.